Hi, I'm Jeremy Crosby.
And I'm Nick Boucher. We're your hosts for the program that's all about your city, Talking Fitchburg.
Every weekday, we pull together the news, events, and information you need to stay on top of what's happening in the city of Fitchburg.
Find Talking Fitchburg on cable TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and our live stream on the web. Plus, you can find all our headlines and stories on Facebook, YouTube, and our video on demand service. This is your city.
Keep up with Talking Fitchburg and the issues affecting you and your neighbors.
Want to know what's happening in your city? Get Notify Me messages from the City of Fitchburg. Visit fitchburgwi.gov on your computer or mobile device and select the big Notify Me button on the left. Enter your email and/or phone number, whichever is best for you to get notifications. Scroll down the list and select all the topics you're interested in to receive email or text messages about. You'll be notified every time one of your topics is updated. Sign up for Notify Me, one more way to keep up with your Fitchburg government.
Put into this whole process. It's been long, and it's been difficult, but you all have put a lot into it, so I appreciate that. And I'm just going to go over kind of the format of the meeting and some of the expectations for tonight. We're going to start with presentation and steering committee questions and discussion. After that, we're going to go on to public comment. For public comments, anybody who wants to speak will have to fill out a comment registration form, as Aaron mentioned, and there's a stack of them over at the table at the entrance there. We also have a sign-in sheet over there. Each person can speak once. The comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and staff won't be responding or answering questions to the comments during the meeting, but we can arrange a follow-up either by a phone or email. If reach out to us if you'd like a follow-up. Following the public comment period, we'll have another discussion by the steering committee, and that discussion ideally will end with a consideration of a recommendation to move ahead with the adoption of this plan. We're going to kind of follow Robert's rules for the recommendation and adoption and vote. So we'll need a motion and a second to consider any proposed vote by the steering committee. And I think we're going to do a roll call vote on this on this plan too. So we'll go through each person individually and ask for the vote. And obviously, any of the committee members can make any motion that they want. Again, ideally, we're looking for a motion to recommend that it moves forward through the adoption process. So with that, I will...
Brad, there was one suggestion that maybe the people up front should just quickly introduce themselves, since it's been quite a while since we've met. We've got one new person.
Yeah, good idea. I guess I'll start. I'm Brad Sipple, Community Development Planner for the City of Fitchburg.
And I'm Steve Keller with MSA, working on this project from consultant side. Ed Kinney, resident for the Commission.
Aaron Richardson, resident.
Jason Valerius, Capital Area Regional Planning Commission.
Elizabeth Thompson, resident.
Nicole Vafadari, Alder for District 4.
It's been a minute since we do the mic. Sorry. Sorry, I should explain that beforehand.
That's all right.
All right. Any questions from the steering committee on, I guess, the rest of the meeting format or anything? All right. I'll turn it over to Steve then to start with the presentation.
All right, well, Happy New Year. It's been a few months since we last met. If you recall, we canceled the last meeting when we were going to go over the engineering with a couple of the petitions that came through that we wanted to take time to analyze and react to, and it has impacted portions of the updated plan. So we'll go through a little bit. So now we're looking at the entire plan. So just noting there's 4 chapters. One is background and engagement summary. A little asterisk there that it was decided to have full documentation of engagement to be left on the city's website. And so what you're seeing in the plan is a summary of all the activities, but it will live on the city's webpage with all the information. Chapter 2 is the policies to guide decisions on development proposals. 3 is documenting the concept development process, including establishing that preferred concept and desired design themes. And Chapter 4 is evaluating infrastructure needs and recommendations to allow for that build out at some point in the future. In appendices, you'll note that we have an action plan that's kind of more city driven, potentially. So there's a few items in that appendix. B is relevant plans and development review. C is where you're getting that additional engineering background. So in the plan, we summarize and get to the meat of how it's impacting the development and the growth of this neighborhood, but we left more of the details for the engineering on Appendix C. And then there'll be 11 by 17 maps in Appendix D, so you could see maps at a larger scale. So I'm going to go through vision, goals, strategies, and design guidelines that have been updated. Feel free to break in at any point. I'm fine with not speaking to you for 40 minutes and not having you interject. So we'll start with the vision statement. It has not changed. Greenfield neighborhood will balance residential and economic growth while preserving the local character and quality of life of its current and future residents. Next page is we have goals, and they're broken out into 5 categories: housing, mobility, economy, quality of life, and sustainability. This is one of the most updated sections, so most of you won't see as many red, but the red shows what has been removed and what has been edited. The housing goal is still the same. Additional housing options will be provided in the neighborhood, but will be strategically placed and designed and buffered to be compatible with the existing Greenfield residents. So strategy 1 has been updated to say, encourage a variety of housing types, forms, price points, and tenures in the neighborhood, locating the least dense housing next to the existing residential lots. Number 2, encourage well-designed developments that mitigate any potential conflicts in providing a mix of housing types. Number 3, this is in direct response to the petition. You'll see the map on the right there that shows a 200-foot buffer, which is part of that petition, of what is the established neighborhood. And it states, new development adjacent to the existing established Greenfield neighborhood shall include mitigation techniques to maintain the general local character of this neighborhood. There are additional statements, and with each of these, if you look in the plan, and in the additional statements, it talks about this 200-foot buffer and matching the same requirements for setbacks, for height restrictions that is found in the neighborhood. Number 4, encourage traditional neighborhood design developments that allow for missing middle and small lot housing. Number 2, economy goal did not change. Employment and goods and services will be strategically located and connected to reduce the dependency on longer vehicle travel and to provide local and convenient options near the neighborhood. Only one of these have been updated, and that is number 2, in direct relation to conversation we had at the last steering committee meeting with the flex spaces, where we are offering an opportunity. It could be business park or it could be residential of varying densities. The question was, well, how do you decipher if it becomes a isolated neighborhood? So here it says, promote flexible land uses east of the tracks that allow for either gentle increases in residential density or business park to respond to market needs and landowner interest. In that additional language, I'll go to Jason. It says there's basically, I think we get to it later, there's really 2 clusters. One area in a map, I don't know if I have any, we'll go here. Kind of cut off, but north of Irish is one cluster. South of Irish is another cluster. If a proposal comes forward with at least 50% of that cluster in one use, meaning is it residential or is it business park, the remaining portion of that ideally would be that same type of use. Jason, do you have a question?
I feel called out there. Thank you. The phrase gentle increases caught my eye, and I'm curious if that is allowing for not just the entirety of that area to be a gentle increase over what's existing nearby, but gradations of increase as you move away from existing.
It could be inferred that, but generally speaking, it was drafted with the intent of handling the flex space areas.
Which are those in this image on the far right edge? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a little
Yeah.
cut off in this example, but there's the purple hatch is that business park, and I can get to a better image. I'll jump ahead and come back. There we go. So this area here, that's one, and below that, this shows the medium-high density residential or business park. Below that is a higher density residential or business park. So this cluster, if more than 50% of that area has been proposed to a certain use and is approved, the remaining portion should be in that similar use per drafted. We can talk if we want to modify that. That's what I concluded as a good direction. And then where number 4 is, that section shows medium high residential or business park, similar case, 50% of that area.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just had a question when you talked about these flex spaces, when it gets to like 50% of one use, then the rest of it should be that. But what happens if you have like 20% one use and 20% of another use, and it's kind of both of them are happening? Is that kind of dependent on like plan commission and staff to make sure that they at least are planned well and they work well together and they don't have this really weird border? Is that kind of on them to make sure that this makes sense as it develops?
Yes, that's accurate. That when there's a strategy or a policy, you want to get to, is the design proposed meeting the intent of that strategy? And that is ultimately up to staff recommendation, but ultimately plan commission and council approval.
And I don't remember who owns those parcels. It might be one landowner, in which case it'd be weird if that person said, well, I want to do 40% of this and 40% of that. It's probably going to be a development that happens at once that's thought out. But I couldn't remember who owns that either.
Yep. Any other questions? Bear with me, I'm going to have to go back. Don't look if it bothers you to see a bunch of slides. Then we're moving on to mobility. There was a slight modification to the goal, support future regional transportation connections that limit impacts on Greenfield's local streets as the region continues to grow. But there were no changes to the strategies listed with this goal. 3B, no change to the goal. Implement safe, convenient, and attractive streets for everyone, regardless of age, ability, or mode of transportation. There was one addition on strategies to design streets, multi-use paths, and trails that include adequate lighting to ensure safety of users. And that was more of a direct request from city staff. Yes.
Is it a fair assumption that any of the lighting, the adequate lighting, would follow the city guidelines of the dark sky? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? We're moving on to quality of life goal. Slight modification. It actually, I believe it said maintain. We had to create and maintain open spaces accessible to all residents for recreation and neighborhood character preservation. Some modifications to these strategies. They're an addition of plan and design public infrastructure that is sustainable, attractive, and low maintenance. There was a modification to the third one there. Plan for parks that vary in size and facilities to fulfill ranging neighborhood recreation interests consistent with the Fitchburg Park and Open Space Plan. And the last addition is make intentional multimodal connections between local and regional park and open space areas, especially developing a path through the proposed Moraine Edge corridor, which is shown in that image. Yes.
So I had a question that we may have covered at the September meeting. But when you have a public path or anything of this nature, or wetland restoration, don't you have to have the permission of the property owners to make that happen? I mean, I can understand if a developer has already bought it and is cooperating with the guidelines, but there's quite a bit of land in at different stages of this that's really under private property use. I don't see the city weighing in and, making that landowner give permission to have a public trail going through their property. I already had one property owner that said they were dead set against that for liability issues.
Yeah, it wouldn't take place on private property without an easement. So they'd have to be willing to give an easement to put the land on, or it would just wait until that property would develop.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments, questions? Sustainability goal was modified to state create an economically and environmentally sustainable development pattern protecting existing natural features. No modification except for the last one there. Consider opportunities for alternative energy use within the neighborhood design. I'll make note that the statement there related to orient streets and homes to maximize available sunlight exposure of installation of rooftop solar panels is still in that strategy, but it's in the description below. So it's pulling out to be more generalized in the main strategy, but it still discusses this as one option of how to achieve that. Sustainability goal B, consider the historical significance of the neighborhood, especially opportunities to preserve farm fields and implementation of low impact development techniques for infrastructure design. That was not modified. There were a couple modifications to the strategies. Number 2, ensure through the development review process that site development and infrastructure improvements occur in area with least possible impact to natural environments. And then number 4, in addition, encourage an energy efficient building consistent with the city's existing energy targets. Again, that's a city staff request. Yes.
On number 2, the developmental review process, is that just the normal process through Plan Commission and everything else? It's
correct.
Not a separate. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Yes.
On that, so when a development goes to the commission or whatever, do they look at things like the type of housing and whether it has basements or any type of protective rooms for people to go to in the event of a tornado?
They look at that kind of thing. I'm not sure that we would have any requirements for, tornado shelter within a house. So,
Okay.
And in this neighborhood case, the ground may not be adequate for basements anyway.
Which part?
Well, there's a map in the plan that shows areas that have soils that create difficulties for dwelling units with basements. Mm-hmm. Let's talk after. I can show you where that is.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? One section that is new to review is placemaking and design guidelines. Notably, the application of this is more regarding non-residential and multifamily to meet these guidelines. So they're written currently as guidelines. I'm not going to go through each one, but just noting the topics. We have eco and sustainable design, site planning, signage and lighting, architectural and design, parking, screening, and landscaping. A pause, there is the one agri-hood. So that was something that came out of this process of a direction. There is portions of the neighborhood, it still shows an option for agri-hood. So since it's a newer concept to most areas, wanted to provide some kind of guidelines related to that, noting preserving natural resources, maintaining 60 to 70% as farmland open space, include shared use trails, encourage engagement with food production spaces. And also number 7 is important, is the idea of compatibility guidelines. So looking at developments that may be 3 stories or above, or planned development that's abutting what I call low intensity residential. And what is that? That's single family, duplex, townhomes of below 8 units, and multifamily, below 6 units, 6 and below, and multifamily 8 and below. And so if you look in there, there's some recommendations of, there's developments with multiple buildings, locate buildings with least intensive character nearest abutting this low intensity development, the existing residential, for example. Buildings should be less than 35 feet within a certain distance of single family and duplex. Varying building plane setbacks. There's a little bit of a nuance in there. If you want to look at it in detail, the suggestion is if you have this multifamily building, let's say next to single family that has an average of 60-foot wide lots, if you average them, it would suggest that that multifamily building should vary its plane every 60 feet as well to give that same character. Also noting providing gables, dormers, or other changes in the roof line. Similar case of that idea of that average of the lot widths is one way I've looked at that. Just to, again, give that character that breaks up that building to be more compatible with the adjacent lower intensity use. Looking at the roof pitch, consideration of individual unit entrances where you can along the ground floor for multifamily. You know, it gives that character of a street with porches and entries that you don't get in some cases with multifamily. It's all by hallway. And he went through a lot there. Yes.
Just wondering, a lot of these make sense why they're related to non-residential and multifamily. But looking at the documentation, things like, especially like almost everyone under the eco-sustainable design, but also some under site planning and lighting, those are really good ideas for single-family homes as well. Just wondering why we decided to limit this. And I know it's just an encouragement, but it would seem like, I mean, rainwater collection systems, dark sky friendly exterior lighting, maximizing using solar, wind, like people have that on single family homes. Just wondering why the thought process between not including them here.
Generally, when we've used this practice, it's been more focused on larger developments to not impose too much. It is a guideline. In some cases, these turn from guidelines to codified, so that might be part of it. I understand what we're suggesting. We could modify those specific areas to say for all developments. Again, it's all guidelines, so it does not change the reality that it's not being restrictive to any development.
I would be in favor of, you know, if it's consistent for the city. I don't need to. This isn't a hill I need to die on. But I think hearing what's so important from the community, it feels like all of these things are really trying to respect what the community has told us, which I really like. And it does seem like, in my opinion, it should apply to every piece of development that's done in the community, the setbacks matching, like, again, it's encouragements, but if no one was extremely against it, I'd be interested in looking at including it, but also I don't need to disrupt the whole process to include it.
Do we want to wait to the end to have that conversation, or do we want to just get a consensus now on that?
That's a good question. Why don't we just get a sense of it, and if we...
My concern when I was reviewing this section in the plan is a lot of this is just really great architectural design and from an aesthetic point of view, and I don't mind that. But one of the things early on that we talked about was affordable housing and the need for affordable housing. And so when you put in all these beautiful additions, you know, and everybody gets a porch, blah, 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 it's a great place to live, but is it affordable housing still, or is this really getting into kind of middle and upper class, even especially on the multifamily? Because we kind of wanted to maybe do a partnership with Habitat for Humanity. So I just want to put that out there.
I mean, I'll just make a comment that I understood, and there is some additional cost potentially. I know that architects get creative of meeting this, and they want that housing even to match within neighborhoods. So I've seen some good designs of incorporating what we're talking about. But maybe they can't hit on every element that maybe another development could. Again, if it stays as encouragement.
You mentioned individual unit entrances from multifamily buildings, which I think is a great idea. But in the event someone's doing a garden-style project, the building should at least address the street. And we've missed some opportunities to have that in the past. I'd like to see that put in here.
I've got one more on that, unless you were going to respond there first.
I'm just clarifying. I think you're talking about front entry facing the street.
Yes. I mean, you may have an entry that faces a parking lot and back as well. But, I mean, we've got a big project on Fish Hatchery Road that should address Fish Hatchery Road, and it doesn't. And that was a miss. So if we put this in here, it'll be a reminder.
And I believe it's in the general site planning requirement, not in that specific of compatibility, which is actually better because it means it's more general to any case. I don't know if I even listed right here. Primary entrance fronting public street under number 2.
Oh, okay. Great. Yep, thanks.
As a point of reference on this, I was looking at the city's outdoor lighting ordinance to see how it applies. So there's an example of codification of something that is listed in here more generally. And as I understand it, trying to sort through across a couple different chapters, single family and duplex are exempted from those requirements, which isn't to say the plan shouldn't encourage it at the single family level, but for a piece that has been codified, it hasn't included that so far. But I agree with your comment.
If there's no additional comments, we can come back to that when we talk about edits to recommending the plan. Okay. Now we'll talk about updates to the preferred concept and the future land use map. Again, just want to hit the disclaimer again that what it is, it's a long-term vision for what's allowable, supports identifying character and design parameters, and identifying infrastructure needs to best serve the neighborhood and adjacent lands in fiscally responsible way. What it's not is suggesting property shall redevelop or be sold for development, restricting landowners from using the property as they're currently using it, determine exact placement of roadways beyond connecting point A to B for collector roads. Again, trying to make that through connections. It can vary as it goes through the land. And then it does not determine lots or specific building type placement. If you think back to September, we talked about these areas, and notably, number 1 was where we moved that to a flexible use between business park and the residential. Number 2, it previously showed neighborhood mixed use and medium density residential. The neighborhood mixed use already allows for higher density residential, so we've pulled it back to just be neighborhood mixed use because that does allow for residential as part of that component. Number 3, incorporating back the Irish Lane connection through the railroad tracks, that we've had conversations like if you do that collector road to the north, there would have to be conversations with the railroad company, but a starting point is to keep both access points if possible. Number 4, flexible use policy and strategy we talked about earlier about how could this make up maybe not be isolated residential. And then number 5, continuing to allow that agrihood or single family to be in that location. This is that table I showed and it hasn't changed. Just we're through this process. We've had land use concepts from bubble diagrams to refined land use to updated land use to the preferred, and how you've seen directions on each of these future land use categories, with even to dropping the business park, depending if the flex spaces turn out, because that's what the black hatch is. Commercial neighborhood mixes come down. High density residential is flattened or gone down. medium, high density residential went up, and now it's just slightly above where it was. Similar in medium density residential, there was potential of increase to low density residential depending on the flex space. And then neighborhood has come down, open space has gone up. So looking at the low to medium densities that are suggested for the future land use categories in the comp plan, this, if it developed like this full built out, it could be between 1,000 and 4,200 total units. And looking at the scenarios we have, we've also talked about an interchange. So we've pulled back where you see now that little egg shape that says a potential interchange to be kind of, as we described, needing a transportation plan study to determine if it's plausible there, where it's located, does it connect to County M? But we wanted to look at both scenarios for the flex space. Is it all residential, which is scenario A, which then you'll see 2,400 to 4,200, the higher end. If it's all business park in this flex space, it could be as low as 1,000 to 1,700 units. And that's inclusive of the existing neighborhood. So that's included in the number. Again, part of this process is the current comp plan does not identify the future land use for this neighborhood. It identified a need to do this planning process. And so out of this will be a amendment to the future land use map to incorporate what you're seeing on this map. And what you'll notice from the concept, don't have it here, the internal roads we had within the concept are not part of this, right? So we're only showing the primary collector roads, A and B, and extensions of existing roads as kind of a requirement for future development. Again, it could vary where that flows through the neighborhood, but the intent goes back to relieving pressures on Irish and Sayin and other current roads by having those two collectors. And here's what I noted about that flex spaces clusters north and south of Irish. Any comments, questions? So that was just showing some of the acreages by how it's broken out. Again, mostly low density residential west of the tracks. Orange has some medium density. You see the greater density east of the tracks or the business park.
Will
Yes.
there be any other content focused on the open space, or is this the time to talk about open space?
We talk about stormwater, but not specifically open space. So
I guess my commentary is a brief reflection on kind of where we ended up landing through this process on the notion of an east to west open space corridor through the city, which is in the and I don't know which plan it originated in, but it's documented in this plan as the Moraine Edge Park and Preserve along the north side of Irish Lane. And I think it was a fantastic idea that is playing out here is established in pieces with, at one point, a connector through the medium density residential that is just a narrow strip that, is that under power lines? Is that right?
that's correct.
And, you know, I don't know, I mean, right, we're kind of making sausage here a little bit, and there's been a lot of inputs into this process. I wish it could have turned out better. The bigger scale, longer term kind of commentary I would offer is that decades ago when this notion was established in planning documents, what the city should have tried to put in motion was an effort to create a funding mechanism by which this could actually happen, such as a purchase of development rights program where the city could choose to tax itself to have the resources to do this, because it doesn't just happen. And you know, here we're seeing the challenge of making it happen without funding at the table. So I wish it could be a little better. I understand why it is the way it is. I think it's something to keep in mind moving forward, that it's really hard to do this without a way to pay for that preservation as land values increase and development shows up.
Thank you, Jason. I will say that internally we've had conversations about, my understanding of that moraine edge was the edge of what is urban and what is going to turn to rural. And the progression of Fitchburg has seen additional development and assumes to be even east and west of here. I could see, it's not written in the plan, that our southern border here, where you're seeing a lot of green, that could be an alternative moraine edge portion of this segment that you likely won't see as intensive development further south of this neighborhood. But that's just my own opinion. It's not in the plan, but just making that note.
I can add too that during this process, the concept was amended in Fitchburg CIP, the capital improvement plan, to be more of like a corridor connecting open spaces throughout the area that's shown as the Moraine Edge Park and Preserve. The aim with that is to improve the likelihood and possibility that it'll be implemented. But I totally understand where you're coming from. Having it closer to the vision would be nice, but it's a lot of open space. So, thank you.
I have a question. If you could go back to, oh no, here it's on there. Can you talk a little bit more about Collector A and B and the extension of Old Indian Trail and what scenario has to occur for those to move forward? If I'm understanding you, that has to happen before any development happens, or am I misunderstanding that?
Most likely that would happen concurrent with development happening.
Sorry, it wasn't on. In a scenario where, say, the northwest corner, the orange medium density, is approved for development, what happens with Collector B? No, that one, yeah. Does Collector B just then get built all the way through, or is there?
No, it would get built through the limits of the development.
Through the limits of the development.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about the extension of Old Indian Trail?
That would be the same. That one would require. That one wouldn't be available for development until sewer was available there, but that would be the same thing. It would happen concurrent with development to the limits of whatever development.
So I guess I'm trying to get at chicken or egg. What comes first? You're saying
between the road and the development?
It happens at the same time.
The development would come first. The parcel would have to be proposed for development before the road would be built. The developers build the road as part of the development process.
Okay, and they have to perfectly own the property on which they're developing?
Yes.
In other words, they can't build road through another property to the property they're developing?
Correct.
Okay, and what assurances do private landowners have that the city wouldn't invoke eminent domain to put some of these collector roads through?
I don't know that there are any assurances that the plan can provide. I guess my best assurance I can think of right now is that we aren't interested in spending a bunch of money to put roads through private property when it doesn't occur with development. And when development happens, it's paid for by the developers and the city accepts it as infrastructure. I don't think there's a way that in this plan we could guarantee that eminent domain would never be used for anything, but it's not current practice.
Ed, can you think of any times we've done that? You were on Planning Commission for a little while.
Yeah, it's been pretty limited. And I couldn't think of any, and I think I reached out at some point, Brad or Deanna, someone provided, maybe there were a couple of examples, but I don't know if they actually ended up coming through as eminent domain or if they were just negotiated.
There has been some examples that initiated the process through the courts with the Osborne property. I don't know that it was exactly eminent domain, but they negotiated through the courts for the Highway 14 interchange. It's not, I think I just want to be very clear. The city doesn't build new roads or infrastructure, developers do. And so they buy a parcel, or a landowner decides to develop a parcel, and then they build roads, sewer lines, water lines to city's standards, and then we will accept them as public infrastructure, but cities don't have funds to just go start building roads or sewer and water lines. That's just not what we do.
I think probably the best way to guarantee is make sure that you're voting for council members and mayors that would never consider doing something like that, and making sure you encourage people to run for those offices. That's probably the best way of doing that.
I would second that point of, like, as an alder, I would never think that the city should use taxpayer dollars to essentially bankroll a developer or do something on private land that doesn't at least benefit the landowner. Like, that is, Aaron, I think your point is very salient on, like, make sure. It's a great question to ask alders when they come to your door and say, like, hey, how do you feel about this? Because I think it's a really important point.
A related question I have is so this is a bigger picture thing, how is the city using an official map right now? Is that an active ordinance or effort in place? An official map. So the official map is a statutorily enabled tool by which land that's planned for certain uses, especially roads, can be protected for whenever development would occur.
I'm not aware of it being used currently.
We certainly have our adopted future land use map.
Yeah.
And then we use our neighborhood plans as the guidelines for future roads, right? So this step is very important. So, for example, when McGaw neighborhood plan was done, it laid out the general organization of the larger main roads. We didn't develop exactly one-to-one in McGaw, but that laid out a general path forward.
Mm-hmm. So it probably isn't as big a deal because this isn't a relationship between the city and the town, right? This is all city. And if someone were to say, owner of this land at some point in the future where this road needs to connect would want to deliberately try to prevent its future development as a road by doing something, whatever construction that they would want to do, such as building a home in there, would come before the city, and you would look at this plan, you would say, that's not consistent with the plan. Now, that's not compelling them to build a road, but it's also preventing them from doing something that would make that road that much harder. And I'll add to that just the commentary that this is even with this road, this neighborhood has a deficit of connecting streets. And this road, if 50 years from now this road doesn't exist, people are going to be looking around and saying, how did that happen? How was that allowed to happen? That there wasn't any kind of connecting road through here.
Good conversation. Any other statements? Good. Move on to the engineering. So through this process and through analysis, there's key points considered. One, the land uses, low density wooded neighborhood surrounded by farm fields and wetlands to the south. Notably, high quality wetlands are present downstream in the Swan Creek and Murphy Creek watersheds, including the Wabisa Wetlands State Natural Area. Residents and public interest have noted about preserving and restoring the wetlands in the neighborhood to protect the watershed quality and quantity. Noted localized flooding issues near Curry Court and Old Indian Trail. There was a study done in 21, but no implementation of that. Near Sayin Irish intersection, noted occurrences of stormwater overtopping Sayin Road and flooding of homes. Basically, you're looking at the terrain and where water flows. You see all these arrows. There's really three general directions it flows. I numbered the three when they leave the study area. North will travel to the intermittent stream of Swan Creek, number one in the north. Number two, east will flow into a closed depression outside the study area, meaning the water collects and it can't have a way to exit. And three, south flow to the Murphy's Creek. So part of this plan, and also ultimately, if it goes on to an amendment to the urban service area, there are some set standards that can be in place and is suggested in this plan, some above what is state, county, and city requirements because of the sensitivity we've talked about. One of those is matching pre-development rates for 1, 2, 10, 100, and 20-year, 24-hour storm events. I've highlighted pre-development rates because typically that is existing present conditions. And in this case, a lot of this would have been farm field cropland to improve conditions. We're considering pre-settlement conditions, meaning grasslands and woodlands. So not what the current development is, but going even further back as a starting point baseline. Because a lot of this goes to you have to meet the pre-development conditions. Infiltration volume, maintaining 100% of pre-development infiltration volume. Previously it was 90%, and that's pretty typical. So again, this is the idea that you're actually treating it all on site. So there would be almost minimal nominal that would leave the site. Once it's through all the BMPs, the wet and dry infiltration basins. Water quality, retain 80% of total suspended solids compared to no controls. And in that area, I talked about closed depression. There is a portion around Curry Court. It's highlighted here in the circle. In addition to all the standards we just talked about, it also requires establishing a flood protection elevation equivalent to the standing water level that would result from a back-to-back 100-year runoff event or events.
Is it possible to suggest or recommend a detention pond in a location that is adjacent to but slightly outside the boundaries of the plan?
Is per the neighborhood plan or just in practice?
Well, I mean, if you put it in the plan, I think it would probably aid the rest of the plan. What I'm suggesting is detention at the southwest corner of Irish and Kane, because there's a lot of water that comes off through there and runs very rapidly along Irish and through the rest of this, through the existing Greenfield neighborhood, that could be better controlled with detention there. But it's outside the plan, so I don't know, what options do we have there to at least suggest or recommend that?
I'm sure we could put in text. I know that through this process in the outer neighborhood plan, it's been pretty stringent on staying within the neighborhood study area. I guess I would have to leave it to staff to speak on that. We can come back to it unless you want to, Deanna.
I think the tricky part, Ed, is how do we enforce that? I mean, we can certainly. I'm not against putting a recommendation in the plan to recognize that. My question would be is what does that look like in practice, right?
In practice, in this case, the property ownership is the same on both sides of the road.
Yeah.
So if it were something that were in the plan and that ownership would have changed in the future, at least it would be documented in the plan that that's something that might occur.
That could be considered. Yeah, I'm fine that we recognize that that's an issue in the plan as a recommendation.
Okay.
Question, Steve. The presentation here refers to, it's a little ambiguous to me. It brings up the notion of comparing post-development to pre-settlement conditions, so pre-farming instead of farming. But is that language where's that language in the document? How does that show up?
It's noted as the curve numbers. There's a table that does identify that these are you can't go above the curve numbers that are presented in that table. It would be on the page related to this. So it is presently in there. I don't think it said pre-settlement conditions. It went more specific to the numbers.
And does that need to be a policy item in this plan, or is that really just a reflection of existing city policy or practice to do that?
It would definitely require, you can correct me wrong, I believe it would require through the USA amendment being identified by CARPC and DNR approved part of that USA amendment.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. And I believe those design parameters, or I guess those assumptions that are in the conceptual stormwater management plan, are included as the recommendations under the stormwater chapter.
If it is the intent to influence the future urban service area amendment process to use that to codify this, both the 100% stay on and the comparison to pre-settlement curve numbers would be, I'd like to see that explicit in here. I think that would be to the benefit of later processes.
Yeah, I'll verify. If that's not in there, we'll add that.
And that's one of the things I want to comment on is I really like having the 100% of pre-development infiltration requirement. I know by law, we're only allowed to do 90. I didn't realize we had the option of having this recommendation. I believe from the notes, CARPC has to approve that. I guess, sorry to put you on the spot. Not sorry to put you on the spot, but is that something that CARPC has done in other developments? Have you seen this? Is this something that you think they are very much okay with and would approve?
Yeah, absolutely. The commission is always in favor of elevating those standards to better protect waterways, and does it in collaboration with the community. So we don't try to impose it upon anyone, but when the community is saying, hey, we want to lock this in as the expectation, we're a mechanism by which we can help you do that.
On the detention ponds, are these going in when the development goes in, or are they going in before the development goes in by chance, so that you know who is responsible for these detention ponds? That was one question that I had. The second is, I don't know if we're coming up on restoration of wetlands. One thing that caught my attention in the plan was this idea of people basically going in and helping to restore, two ideas actually, and there was mention of herbicides being used, which I'm really against, because we have private well owners in the area, and I don't want anything affecting the groundwater. The other thing that was in there too was the idea of allowing developers higher density levels if they will help with the restoration. Doesn't that also get around the plan that we put together with the neighborhood's input? So basically 3 things there.
The last one was just an example, the potential density bonuses in exchange for wetland restoration. Just an example of a way that a way that the city could incentivize the wetland restoration. I would imagine that if we were to develop a program like that, it would need to go through its own public process, because it would be its own set. It would have to be part of the zoning ordinance, so it would have to go through an entire process to become city ordinance. And I think the expectation would be most likely that those bonuses would be available on the east side of the railroad.
No, I understand. I just think getting back to the herbicides, I mean, I know I'm very familiar with the land to the south because my house is near there. It definitely needs some work, but I don't know how much the Canes want to cooperate with people being on their land or use of herbicides. I mean, all that. I think it's gonna need a lot of discussion to happen as far as it's a great idea, but it needs to be fleshed out with the permission of the private landowners, the developers, and the neighbors. So.
Yeah, I would see wetland restoration as most likely to happen with development, not as a separate process on private lands, unless those private landowners were interested in doing it themselves.
Okay, thank you.
And that was on the next slide, so just turn that to there. So noting some of the recommendations for stormwater, the extension of Blaney Road, and that's the north-south road east of the tracks. Currently it stops south of Lacey. There's a new Hartung development there, but taking that all the way to Burn would be a reliever route for Sayin. But it's adjusted here, lower closed depression overflow elevation near the east of the tracks. Consider improvements to drainage way down here to the south. Meet with standards described in previous slides using paired systems, meaning usually take it to the wet basin, take out solids, and then it goes to the dry infiltration basin to seep up into the ground, and then there's a little bit that would reach out ultimately in bigger storms. New culverts under roadway crossings, some of them are not very large, conveying runoff through a 200-year, 24-hour storm event, so sizing that correctly with new culverts. And then with stormwater facilities, integrate landscape to support restoration of natural landscaping and the enhanced restored wetlands. So we've identified some that even work within this development pattern. I'm going to change the color. It's a little hard to see, but there's 5 of them noted. There are other portions, looking at the Klein report that was provided to us of where there are wetlands potentially through here, but localizing it to the ones that are part of the higher quality wetlands, where we're already setting back per the comp plan 300 feet from those wetlands from development. So you could expand those wetland areas and improve those areas. Some of the others are more of drainage ditches that actually through development will be through best practices through the basins and have better quality control than it currently does.
And I just remembered, I didn't answer your first question, Elizabeth, that the basins will be used during construction to manage stormwater and erosion, and so they're built before all of the construction happens, but it's with development.
Any questions on this slide? Move on to water design. Just noting the average and max gallons. Part of that equation is looking at the housing units. No concern there other than there would be a requirement of putting in a well, and talking with staff that likely location is south of Irish, west of the established neighborhood where that red circle is. Throughout, the intention is to see water looping to, if there is a break, you want to be able to continue serving residents. So you will see water looping shown on Burn Road to the south, all the way through on private land to right here. There would have to be this kind of connection to serve so that if there's a break in this portion, there's another service around, vice versa up here. So this was a location that's basically just east of Old Indian. Then we have identified typical piping sizes for each of the roadways through here. Sanitary design. So this one is starting point is looking at the 2000 Sayin Interceptor design study, which identified the areas that can be served. So everything you see in color is areas that potentially could be gravity served back to the Sayin Interceptor, which currently this is the bigger picture of all areas, runs through here. The area in circle is where that Hartung development is. So that's as far as it has been developed. You see that green line that continues where I'm following my mouse. All these portions have not been built and would be built in succession with development.
Do we know whether there's actual capacity to do all that? I mean, from a flow standpoint, right? Gravity, you're fine, but what about the capacity?
Talking with staff, yes, there's capacity to serve.
Okay.
Yep. But noting again, there's no timetable on this, but this is a starting point of looking at how it can be served And then here you see the arrows of how that service. The orange arrows are where that interceptor would be. Basically by terrain, you determine that by gravity, this breaks out into a northern drainage area and a southern drainage area. That red line, still faint, that kind of is in the middle of the neighborhood, is kind of that dividing line. So everything north of the line runs to Irish, and over on Irish over to the interceptor to the east. Everything south of that red line is going to run an Old Indian over to that interceptor. And inclusive of that, staff requested us to not only look within the development, but the realities of potentially additional lands connecting over time if growth strategy suggests that they would grow west or south. So you see that red boundaries in that middle picture of areas suggested where it could be also served. And we used the idea that generally 60% of land could be developed if you exclude parkland, roads, stormwater management, all those aspects. And then looking at 8 units per acre, which is conservatively high on purpose. So that is, we got to a certain unit count for that area that's inclusive. What that matters more about is what is the sizing of the pipe. So the idea is if you keep extending that pipe, you need the original pipe to be large enough to continue that flow from much further west. And so it's just an analysis to make sure that the pipe size that you would put in this neighborhood, if it were to be built out, is large enough. And that's to be determined at 24 inches on Irish Lane and Old Indian. And so we'll get to this a little bit later, but as it's presented, growth of this neighborhood can be served, and it has to be served by those 2 routes on Irish Lane and Old Indian. So does not require hookups for the purpose of another development within the center of the existing neighborhood, but properties over time will have to be required to link up if they're along Old Indian or Irish when development happens. So again, this doesn't get extended until there's development requested to make that extension, and that cost is on the developer. Yes.
Do you remember the low density that we had, housing that we have in the southwest corner of the down there in the lower left-hand corner? Yes. Mm-hmm. Is that going to be able to drain through gravity to the Old Indian connector? Or is that some of that, because it's a pretty kind of steep hill of Kane, and so if there was some of them on the hill, but they'd have to like go up the hill, I don't see how it drains into that main connector. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Part would be what is the depth of upstream the pipe is. But there is a certain point where generally you don't want more than 30 feet deep of that pipe. So, we're doing a conceptual version of this preliminary engineering. That comes to more finite development related review. But generally speaking, if we go back to this map, it suggests that these areas can potentially be served. But we're at a granule right now that is a larger picture than that. Okay. And so there may be portions that may have to be considered that could not be served by gravity, but generally speaking, as presented, the intent is that Old Indian would be that connection point for lands in the southwest.
And
Okay.
Steve, correct me.
I'm having trouble visualizing it, but okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but your team in the analysis determined that it could be built in a way that's feasible to serve all of it, right?
That's correct. But again, it goes to how it's designed and built the first time to, things that come later when it gets into the final design, right? So there are cases that happen that may result in not easily achieving what we're at a preliminary stage assuming can be done. Okay. And again, it goes to the depth of the pipe. So like if you had a pipe here and the earth goes like this, that pipe is still running on a certain slope underneath the ground.
So you would be drilling underneath the hill, basically through it and then down? Is that kind of what we're seeing? I'm just curious.
It ultimately depends on how the road network goes through. A lot of times, sometimes hills come down for roads and putting in lots.
Okay.
We're getting to a granular that is beyond this neighborhood plan. Like suggested again, all these areas are not being required as developed as shown. Individual roads and routing of pipes will be determined by each developer.
Okay, so essentially, a developer too might petition for and get, I mean, and this is 4A, that's, area 4A, way in the future, might petition to actually remove part of that slope and incline in order to have more level plane to put the houses, and that would impact the sewer as well. So you're saying there's a man-made solution to this
You
other
can
than a lift
alter
station?
the landscape to make it more achievable to serve.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Okay.
I've been in developments where you also raise it up so that it wouldn't have to have a lift station in other cases where you can get that gravity flow that you needed. So
Okay.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hope I didn't lose everyone. Any other questions on that? Assumptions. This plan utility maps will be used for Fitchburg engineering staff to demonstrate that utility service is feasible. And we just kind of went through all this. This is not construction plans. The city is not adopting a sanitary sewer plan through this neighborhood plan. No development is required to be on sanitary sewer at this time. It's our understanding that at the sanitary installed on your street, you will need to connect. New development does not require connection from established neighborhood except along Irish Lane and Old Indian per this layout, and there's no timetable or cost estimates for that. City staff will continue to look at resources to defray any potential costs. And this gets a little bit to the phasing. So there's no timeline on this. It's just thinking about two main factors. One is timing of necessary infrastructure and expected market demand for new lots. But the main driver is that number one item. You can't put in development without service to sanitary. And right now there isn't any in the neighborhood at all. Way it's going to be provided is in that number one area in the northeast. Once it's there, it could serve areas in 2 and in 3. And then you can't serve 4, A or B, until 3 is in. Because again, that red dividing line, you can't connect 2 over to 4. And so that might also go to your clarity, actually. It goes east, not north. But it could be done 4A or 4B, because once you have 3, you can go either direction there. Questions on that?
Why does the plan show arrows for extensions of roads into areas that aren't part of the plan and are not currently in the city's comp plan at all?
It's suggested for good planning practice that roads would extend to further the east-west connections through Fitchburg. It would go in the same line as your statement about putting in language for a detention pond in the southwest corner of Kane and Irish. It's good planning practice. There's nothing restrictive of it in presenting that.
Well, that's a different matter because that would be something that may be necessary or practical to achieve this plan. But now we're getting into something that our comp plan does not envision. Does not envision a development west of Kane Road or in that area north of Irish Lane does not envision development there. Now that may change at some point in the future, but that's not what it says now.
Yeah, I would say that the intent of that is just to show if there was ever development that went over there, even though it's not part of our current comp plan, it's not part of a FUDA, but we'd want, if development ever occurred west of it, we'd want it connecting into that neighborhood on those streets.
So this isn't,
that's why they go.
We aren't mapping these as potential future roads. We're just showing in this plan where they could occur.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Any other comments, questions? And this clears up my other question that I was getting wrong earlier. It goes east. Traffic, this is based on use, using a manual that's determined average trips. And when we look at this, it's peak trips. So that's AM peak time and PM peak time. Look at the housing units we've described already of how we determined that. And for a little different, commercial and business park uses are determined more by the square footage. So looking at some typical developments, determining what is building on lots, what percentages of 5 acres would be a building. And that's helped to determine how many trips based on that use if it went in. Also, there's another factor of just general growth in the county that impacts these roadways. We were slightly more conservative from the 0.4 that Dane County. We're using 0.5 here. And again, we're looking at two options. One is all residential for the flex space versus option B of all business park. So again, we're talking about trips between 1900 AM trips up to 2100, and then PM trips 27 up to around 27, actually, either direction of the use. That gets utilized also then to look at how is these trips distributed in and out of the neighborhood. So you see the red boxes kind of detail the percentages assumed that exit the neighborhood from within. Collector A is just knowing that would be 35% of the new trips. You know, we went through this process originally where that didn't exist, that road. Through the process to determine that Collector A is important to relieve Irish Lane. That shows a 25% of increase in trips from if it was fully built out. But if Collector A was not there, majority of that would come to Irish. Also notable, showing that increase in new trips of 10% on Sain and 5 to 20% on Kane Road. I put a few in green as well at the bottom there, just notably the difference between this option, which is no interchange, and the next one will show of if there were an interchange. So there's 35% on new trips on Sain, north of Irish. Burton Road is at 5%. Irish Lane is 15%. And I'll start from the bottom then. You'll see that with an interchange, assume that actually negligible, very little amount of new trips on Irish Lane, east of 14, 0 to low amount on Burn Road, still 10%. Oops, I'm sorry, 35 down to 10% to the north of Irish on Sain. The base numbers within the neighborhood don't change. There's an uptick in Collector A up to 40% with that interchange. But then you see some of the balance gets pushed to the interchange with 45% going north on the interchange, 20% south on the interchange, on 14. We are tasked to look at 3 intersections as part of that. So part of looking at the trips, we did traffic counts as well. We were able to analyze at full build out, whenever that is, way off in the distance. We wanted to look at how these intersections would function. There's this level of service, LOS, from A to F. Once you're getting to D and below, definitely some improvements are definitely necessary. A to C is generally okay. Obviously, A is best. Showing Kane Road and Wayland to be at level of service B in both scenarios. In both scenarios, when I mean interchange or no interchange. Irish Lane and Kane Road, assuming the north leg will be added with the development, all approaches except for the northbound lane are expected to operate at or above level service C in both scenarios. However, full build out an eastbound right turn lane at the intersection of Irish Lane and Kane is warranted. In Sain and Collector A, wasn't fully analyzed, but by warrants, it likely would require either a traffic light or roundabout at some point in the future to be monitored. Questions on that? So just noting there's a recommendation to each of these, just noting that 1 through 4 was the slides we just went through of those improvements. 5 is considering expansion of the bus service if warranted, maybe even connection to Fitchhatchery Road BRT line. 6, consider constructing multi-use paths to connect the Greenfield development to existing multi-use path to the northwest of Nobel Drive. 7, multi-use path through a new Moraine Edge corridor. 8, require right-of-way of Wayland Road and Kane. 9, ensure safety and convenience of bicycle and pedestrians are prioritized with any future road or intersection improvement. And 10, consider adding bike lanes or multi-use path to Cyene Road within the Greenfield development and along new collector roads A and B. With the question of Cyene, right, we know that some of the homes are closer. It's a consideration. It would have to be some design considerations if that is a plausible improvement.
What do you typically do looking at the rail corridor going through there, particularly where Blaney Road comes up right next to it? I mean, do you look at preserving some option for access to the rail, whether it be for commercial or whether it be for commuter?
Had not been considered or discussed through this plan of that. Obviously, I think it's more easily achieved if it was in the back of lot versus across the road. I don't think that really came up with staff discussions, to my knowledge.
Yeah, as far as the commuter rail goes, this was not identified as one of the, I guess, a likely stop because, typically I think commuter is a mile apart or more. Maybe it's half mile, but
So it would be too close to the one further north if that were to happen.
yeah.
Okay.
And freight, yeah, I don't think we discussed it at all. I think part of the, if a developer wanted to build business park there and expected potential rail connections, they could propose the road alignment to be different. The reason it's shown as it is to allow for larger business park lots, which is typically what's in demand. So a developer could propose a road, kind of coming around the other side and having rail access through that.
Okay, so that would be handled at the time that something is actually proposed.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So I just want to cover, we went through a lot of the details and some of these were already touched on, but want to specifically talk about the petitions and how the plan has or has not matched what the requests were on that. So we'll start with the Friends of Wabisa Wetlands petition. I don't have the exact statements that they asked, but I'm telling each of the points of how we resolved it. So they provided a Klein study that showed those restorable wetlands. We utilized to identify those restorable wetland locations and prioritized based on their value, with ones near Swan Creek and Murphy's Creek as priority 1, and existing high-quality wetlands is priority number 2. The second one is low-density development with properly designed and constructed stormwater BMPs. The basins will improve current conditions and will convey the stormwater that is treated prior to releasing some of the stormwater that is not infiltrated in the soil to higher quality wetlands. 3, performance standards require 100% stay on, as was done in McGaw Park Neighborhood Urban Service Area Amendment. The conceptual stormwater management plan also uses pre-settlement conditions we talked about as the baseline for stormwater modeling. And ultimately, we're talking about 300 plus acres of protected open space, which is inclusive of stormwater locations, compared to what is at 122 acres of currently protected open space. And, part of that was also the comp plan has that certain statement of areas outside the current USA need a 300-foot buffer from development. So you already had that in your city comp plan, and we followed through with that. So those are the main things we covered on the Wabisa Wetlands petition. Look at the Greenfield neighborhood petition. This plan is created as a guide for future development, not a development plan. Professional engineers and planners have developed the preliminary hydraulic and environmental assessments to locate future land uses and stormwater facilities. As noted, Appendix C has that greater detail than the base document. Plan does not propose curb and gutter, sidewalks, and sanitary sewer for much of the existing neighborhood. Current practice is to install curb, gutter, sidewalks, and sanitary where necessary due to new development, safety, stormwater, or sanitary issues. 3, sanitary sewer in existing developed areas proposed only where necessary to serve new development on the west side of the neighborhood, which is Irish Lane and Old Indian Trail, and potentially further west towards Fitchburg Road. However, city staff cannot ensure that infrastructure will never be installed in the neighborhood. At some point, for example, due to failing septic systems, the neighborhood property owners may request sanitary sewer. Housing Strategy 1.3 was added to establish mitigation techniques for new development adjacent to the established neighborhood, following allowed building heights as established in that neighborhood, meaning 3 stories and 35 feet. Path connections are still shown for East Hill Drive and West Hill Drive, but that doesn't necessarily mean both will be added. It provides multiple options depending on the feasibility of a path. It was asked about Gold Drive that has water and train issues that make difficult to connect. Old Indian Trail is the only street connection proposed between Irish Lane and Burn Road. The Old Indian Trail right-of-way is public currently as in the established neighborhood and was clearly intended to continue west as the Greenfield neighborhood continues to develop. Also important to note that there is 1 mile between Burn Road and Irish Lane, which is far exceeds the typical distances between streets. In an urban neighborhood, we're talking 200 to 1,000 foot separation of streets. Suburban neighborhoods, 300 to 1,500. Even in the case that we're presenting here, Old Indian leaves 300 feet between Irish Lane and Old Indian and over 2,000 feet between Old Indian and Burn Road. No further changes were made to the preferred concept. These areas have been significantly reduced throughout the planning process. The business park and higher density land uses were kept to the east side of the neighborhood to create a necessary buffer from the established neighborhood. Studies have repeatedly shown that lower density residential costs much more for public service and generates more than it generates tax revenue. Land costs in Dane County region are high. Initial investment in infrastructure is expensive, and low density residential costs significantly more to build than higher density. And while initial costs passed on to future occupants of the new homes, long-term maintenance, once it's dedicated over to the city, is to maintain those, and those costs are on residents in the entire city, including the current Greenfield property owners. And the last one is agricultural property owners are free to preserve existing ag lands. Nothing in this plan requires ag areas to develop. This plan helps guide decisions should a landowner decide to develop or sell their land for development. Densities have been reduced through this planning process and areas have been identified for agrihood, allowing this use to continue and or include clustered homes. Anything the committee wants to ask on those responses? So noting tonight, remaining is committee questions and comments, then public comment, and then further discussion with potential consideration recommending the plan with any edits. I'm noting that preferably it's more content-based edits. Any grammar or spelling, those could be provided to Brad before this plan is finalized, but I'm more concerned about is there any major content issues we want to talk about. From here, if it were to be recommended, June 10th, referral from council, June 17th, presentation and public hearings for both plans, meaning we're also doing the South Stoner neighborhood plan as well. And so that one already has been recommended by the steering committee. So those will be coming together. They have a public hearing on the same night and presentation. There would be no plan commission vote that evening, just presentation and public comment. July 10th would be the comment deadline internally, and then September 16th, Plan Commission public hearing and adoption, followed by September 23rd, Council public hearing and adoption. So that's the presentation. Can open back up to the committee with additional questions or comments.
So when it goes from referral by the council, is it going to go to the committee system? Because I already assumed that it was going to go to Rural and Ag, the Transit Committee, and so forth. For further discussion there, not just Plan Commission and then the City Council.
Yeah, we sent it out to committee staff when it was released to the public. So it's up to the committee staff whether they're going to take it to their committees or not. And that's where we're giving all the committees until July 10th to submit comments. And they all have a meeting within that time frame. So that's how we're handling committee discussions and committee comments, and then the public hearings will be at Plan Commission and Common Council.
Are we going to do public comment now? I know I've got at least a couple people that want to. I don't know if you want me to do this, Brad, or you.
It's up to you. I can do it too.
I'm happy to. Do you need me to time, or do you have the shot clock thing? Perfect. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Yep. So I've got 2 people so far. If you do have interest in speaking, there are half sheets of paper over on my right, your left of the room. If you want to fill that out and bring it up here, just much like council meetings, you have 3 minutes to speak. I'll start with the first person I have here, Amy. I believe it's Steger, possibly, from Fitchburg, wishing to speak in opposition. Come on up. Yeah, right over there. Make sure the light's green. Steger, sorry about that. Oh, can you turn on your mic, please? Perfect.
There we go. I am Amy Steger. I live on Irish Lane in the northwest corner, so right across from Stoneman's Farm. So what I've seen tonight is, and for the past, year, is that a lot of this plan directly impacts my property, particularly with infrastructure development. So I had prepared some notes to talk to you tonight, but after reviewing this presentation and hearing what Steve had to say, thank you for the detail that you included tonight. I appreciate it. I learned some things that I didn't know before. So I kind of have to go on the fly a little bit. So thank you to the steering committee for your service. You were selected to represent the residents and taxpayers of this great neighborhood in Fitchburg, and you play an essential role in our neighborhood planning process. Last December, over 180 Fitchburg residents who would be directly impacted by the Greenfield plan submitted a petition to the city. That same day, Friends of Wabisa Wetlands submitted a letter outlining their concerns and recommendations. In their submissions, these unrelated groups addressed environmental and watershed health, open spaces, infrastructure, density reduction, street connections, and agricultural land preservation. What I observed tonight is that some of what we had said was responded to, some of it wasn't, and some of it came off as a defensive stance from the city, and I didn't see additional compromise coming forward from what the MSA plan has. So from my perspective, no further action has been taken. So I would request that you ask for more time and resources dedicated to reviewing and revising this plan, or reject its adoption as it stands. I do understand that the city desires more space allocated to growth and development, but at what cost? And what we didn't cover is, what I want to share is some questions that came up during the petition process. I'm sorry, I was really nervous at public speaking.
You're doing great.
Some of the questions that came up during the petition process that weren't included in the petition because it's just a signature on the sheet. So, what will development do to the environment? What will this do to our stormwater and flooding issues? What if the council changes the density designations in the future, meaning a developer comes forward and requests it and the council votes on it? Can we ensure new developments will be owner-occupied? And specifically, this feedback is we see a lot of apartment development in the northeast corner of Fitchburg that's directly impacting our traffic counts and things like that. A lot of EPIC employees, I'm a former one myself, even being a local, and that encourages less neighborhood connections, okay? And that is a concern of our residents. How much will this cost me as a homeowner? Is the city offering financial support? Who pays for the roads and municipal infrastructure? What's the plan for our existing roads to accommodate higher traffic? Is collector A or B even needed? How much will that cost? What is the role of developers in this? How will they help our existing neighborhood?
If you can wrap up too as soon as you can, that'd be great. Thank you.
These questions went on, and I couldn't answer most of them myself. I'm not an expert in city planning. You all have more experience in this than I do, and I do appreciate your work. But collectively, neighbors told me that they feel like the city is trying to push through an agenda too quickly without enough information or compromise. So I'm asking you as a steering committee to recommend to slow the process down and to gather more information. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job. And I have Patrick Cheney next.
My comments are about Collector A, which is not on my screen here. Although I live in Tarpelwood Hills to the north of here, I'm interested in this neighborhood because anything that happens here, a lot of the traffic goes up Cyene Road, and so that affects everywhere to the north. The Collector A on there has always been in question to me as whether it's appropriate, and I did see a comment on an earlier, thank you, an earlier survey. No, it went blank. That seemed like it was the initiative of Collector A right there, because it was something like, what can you do about the high traffic speed on Irish Lane? And I felt that disconnecting Irish Lane in any of these versions right here just didn't seem right as the cause of, and then causing the traffic to go on Collector A. Because I know there was sentiment all along the way of don't change the existing roads, and disconnecting Irish Lane as a major road right there just seemed counter to that. I also felt that creating a brand new road, Collector A, up there it just seemed inappropriate, expensive, and just not the best way to handle traffic if that was the reason for creating Collector A, because it seems to me like just adding some stop signs such as at Kane and West Hill and East Hill might take care of the whole problem, and that could be done tomorrow, and it's a lot less expensive than creating a new road. Also, Collector A, I see, is just a little north of the yellow areas there, which are private properties. Other versions, I think, may have gone through there. But then when you get north of there, where it's shown now, then it's into steep slopes. So what's the time going?
50 seconds.
That's
50
it?
seconds left.
Is that it?
Keep going, yeah.
Okay. What? Am I done or what?
No, you got time.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's either I see the map or I see the timer. So anyway, I question if the Collector A is based on speed on Irish, which I don't think Irish should be disconnected. And hopefully that covers what I meant. Thank you.
Thank you. That is all I have right now. Other people are welcome to. I've got one more coming, all right? And as mentioned earlier by staff, both the Planning Commission and the Council will be talking about this. Those are also opportunities that you can come up and come out and speak to people who are ultimately making the final decision. What we are doing is a recommendation. But with that, why don't you go ahead?
David Haight, 5855 Woods Edge Road. As a general comment, this notion that this body and the city can bypass the statutory body, the Plan Commission, that is assigned the exclusive authority to amend the master plan, is legal nonsense. And that's a very large issue, but that's not your problem. So what I want to talk about is the environmental issues. So it was talked about we should do the same thing in this neighborhood as we do in the McGaw Park neighborhood with regard to stay-on and infiltration. And certainly it is the case that the Regional Plan Commission, which is not the decision maker, the DNR is the decision maker. The Regional Plan Commission is a contractor, provides services to the DNR. That was in the McGaw Park neighborhood plan. Do you know how much of the McGaw Park neighborhood complies with that? Zero. The city does not enforce that and did not even recognize that that was an issue. The stormwater permitting for city permits is secret. There's never a posting of any permit that's being applied for in the city being posted or provided to the public. And the public has a right to appeal that to the City Board of Appeals. Doesn't happen. Okay? So the other issue is the Cyene Interceptor through Hartung Fields. So that's proposed to go through with a very deep trench and cut groundwater and springs in a groundwater-dependent wetland ecosystem, that will be fought at the DNR level. That is not something that is likely to occur. And that's something that is dependent upon for this to occur and move forward. The city does not recognize and never has its responsibility for the stormwater permits from the DNR that it applies for to state and check the box that says this affects wetlands. Everything that occurs within the Swan Creek and the Murphy's Creek watersheds affects wetlands by definition. But the city never checks the box. There's never been an NR 103, which is the wetland water quality, which puts the burden of proof on the project proponent to show that there will be no adverse impact to wetlands. The city has never checked the box. There's never been, in all the development that's occurred within the Swan Creek and the Murphy's Creek watersheds, never been an NR 103 determination on any stormwater permit that has ever been submitted by the DNR or any other body. So when we talk about putting these things in the plan, it's only as good as, one, the faith carried out by the city, which has been zero.
If you can wrap up, David, that'd be great. Can you wrap up, please?
Okay. And the fact that this is a self-certifying permit from the DNR. The staff was cut in 2011. They said people get the chance to check the box. We either affect wetlands or we don't. No one checks wetlands. There's never been an NR 103 wetland water quality determination within Swan Creek or the Murphy's Creek wetlands, period. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else? So, come on up.
Do you have a registration form?
Hi, I'm Amy Schulz, live at 2304 South Saline Road, and I've been trying to understand some of the things that are going on with this development plan. And I'm just curious about, when you talk about how, and I'd like maybe someone to correct me if I'm wrong, if the plan were to be fulfilled on some level, let's say making the road go through Old Indian Trail all the way through that neighborhood and continuing on through people's private property, is that possible that that could actually be done? And I guess what I'm wondering is if folks don't want to sell their land and allow for that development to happen, then does that kind of stop it in its tracks? So, for example, where I live, it looks like that sewage area, I think you called it the interceptor, is that correct? Would be going right down my driveway. I don't understand how that works. Can someone, kind of bring us up to speed on something like that? And I think like the other woman that spoke, Amy Steiger, I think, just how there seems to be so little communication to the people that live in the area regarding how this is all going to be implemented, whether there's going to be costs involved to us if sewer is brought to the neighborhood, things like that. So I just feel like there's not enough transparency. It feels sometimes like it's a foregone conclusion that this is in the urban development area, and so we are going to implement it without the neighbors that live in this neighborhood being able to have much ability to say, no, this isn't what we want, or it's going to change the whole character of the community. So I just am asking for better communication and transparency in terms of how this impacts the people that actually live in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can follow up with you later. I can email you with the questions. So.
I know both of your elders are here tonight, too. All right, anyone? Oh, all right, got another one.
Hello, Mike Connor, 2315 South Sain. I'm in part of that storm sewer mess that's involved at Curry Court, and I don't see that getting resolved with you putting a pond on the other side of the tracks. It just doesn't make sense that we're going to try and put more houses in that's going to make more runoff, more stormwater, that we haven't cured what we have now. Also, I didn't hear any discussion about where you're putting the north sewer interceptor in or Blaney Road, involving the headwaters of the creek that come right up in there. I heard nothing about that. So how is that going to be taken care of? And as far as I know, you cannot modify that, so a 30-foot deep trench is not going to work. So I'm not sure where you're putting your sewer, because you can't mess with the headwaters. And thank you for all of you guys that have done all this work. But it still irritates me that you're drawing plans on top of somebody's house or through somebody else's yard and driveway. I think that's insane. And this planning should just go away. We personally do not need to provide Dane County with all of these other housing. And your question about why don't we codify solar? Why don't we add $50,000 to the cost of the house? I've looked into solar. I can't get it for less than $25,000, and they told me, the people that I talked to tell me flat out that it'll never pay for itself. So if it never pays for itself, why would I put out $25,000? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? One last chance. All right, and like I said, this is going to the Council and Planning Commission. Opportunities there to speak as well. Email your alders, the mayor, all of them. I mean, the council is the ultimate decision makers on something like this. So I think that's all the public comment. I don't know, Brad, looks like now steering committee, further discussion. There's a few things people talked about throughout that we might want to adjust, but go ahead.
Yeah, we wanted chance for steering committee to hear public comments before further discussion, and then if there's any edits that the committee would like to see to the plan, we can talk about those now and then consider a recommendation. Yeah, Nicole?
So I just want to address a few things and then maybe get back to the one edit I was hoping to get, and maybe starting with that, just to clarify, I am definitely not recommending that people be required to buy solar panels on their house. My apologies if that was a confusion. I don't get enough sun on my house personally to buy solar panels, but you're absolutely right. That is a personal landowner decision. My question was more, if it makes sense for you, why would we not recommend this for individual homeowners? But the word encouragement in that edit is incredibly important to me, because as a private property owner, you should be able to make that decision. So 100% agreed. Just wanted to go over a few things, just kind of clear up some misconceptions. So Aaron, as you stated, this is not bypassing Plan Commission. This committee is making a recommendation. It does not actually bypass Plan Commission or your elected officials, just to clarify there. In the question of who will pay for the roads, just to reiterate, it won't cost neighbors anything for the roads. Roads are paid by developers, not the city, not individual taxpayers. The only time taxpayers, well, in what we've talked about, pay for something is sidewalks, and as previously stated, sidewalks are not being presented in existing places.
Nicole, thank you for your comment, but I have to insist that we understand that in the current assessment that Fitchburg does for water and for sewer, it is on the homeowners. And this is kind of, the reason I bring this up is, Ed and I were talking about this a little bit last week, is it's kind of an elephant in the room.
Oh, sewer, I agree entirely.
Yeah, and it's been a really big concern in my mind, this whole process, because, doing the math on just when supposedly Irish Lane is going to be redeveloped before any of this, FUTA takes place, and some water is going to be installed there, there's going to be significant costs to homeowners if the current assessment policy continues. So I think that they have a right to be deeply concerned about that. And the same thing with sewer, where the sewer goes on Old Indian Trail and on Irish Lane, those homeowners as well will be assessed. The majority of the neighborhood at present with the adoption is sort of left alone. But council could do something 20 years from now. We don't have any guarantees. So I just want to put that out there, because I do think that's been a cause of concern, and a lot of the communications that I received, that people were like, how much is this going to cost? And it would be helpful. I know Micah said he'd meet with people, and you're here. Micah even suggests possibly another meeting with alders and concerned residents, and to start improving, I think, the transparency and the communication, because we can only do so much. I mean, we could, potentially abstain from voting, but I think we've carried this about as far as we can. We're not engineers, we're not experts. Thank you for your gratitude about our work here, but we're not, we don't necessarily have the expertise that Jason Valerius has here with CARPC, or the expertise on the Transit Committee, and that's a concern of mine, that there's a lot of details here that we as committee members, we're just not going to know.
Agreed entirely. And I think that's why it goes through the process it goes through, right? So to your point, when you lost me a tiny bit there when we were talking about gravity flows of water. I wish I was my uncle, who is a fluid dynamics engineer, but I am not. And that is why, to your point exactly, I agree entirely with you that the sewer pricing is a valid concern. I was speaking more towards roads, but that is very fair. I just wanted to make sure the road piece was very clear, that is paid for by development. I also just want to reiterate over and over, if you don't sell your land to someone, no one is going to come on it and take it from you. As long as I am your alder, I sure as hell am not going to let that happen. As long as Micah is your alder, I don't think he's going to let that happen. I don't think Logan's going to let that happen. And if it does, you better come knock down our doors, because that's so inappropriate. That is not the community that we are, and that's not something that's acceptable. And I'm serious, like that's not okay. And so to that point, there's not going to be that in the process, and shouldn't be. And if it does, you need to ring the bell and ring it loudly. I just want to appreciate the call out of the water being better than it is. With development, we're going to use development to make the water situation better than it is, because with sewer, I found stormwater a very valid concern amongst many, many residents, and it just kind of was really disappointing to hear that, well, all we can say is you just have to keep it as good as it is now, when constituents were saying it's not good enough now. So I was really encouraged to see that in the plan. And I also just want to reiterate my last point, that I appreciate that this is more sessions than the normal number of neighborhood listening sessions that happen for this, but I think it was appropriate. I think we have a very engaged neighborhood, which I very much appreciate. And to that point earlier, if you have any questions, please reach out to myself, Micah, Amy. I know we've had a Zoom conversation before. I will take time out of my day to chat with you all, and I know the other alders will too. And if you have any ideas on how to increase transparency, we have a website available. We've had personal conversations. We've had these meetings. I know we wanted to increase communication with the communications director, but we're not able to fund that. So if you have any specific ideas on increased transparency, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Hi,
thought I should just talk once. I appreciate what you're saying about eminent domain. What Brad said earlier about eminent domain was that the city isn't currently interested in that, and that bothers me because the city can change, just like elected officials can change. Let's write it in the plan that it can't be used. That would be great. But if it's always out there, it's always out there. And that is my personal number one concern on this plan, especially with the Stoneman Farm being in phase 1. If we don't sell, the other phases don't happen. So the city's like, hey, we got to do something about that Stoneman Farm. And I think city officials have been saying that for a while. My feeling is that that has been kind of talked about for the last, well, probably since my parents passed away 20 years ago. So I'm very concerned about that, even though I continually reassure my sister that that won't happen. I'm not sure that won't happen.
I thought you were in number 2. I thought number 1 sort of cut off.
Nope, okay. I'm Collector A goes right through the sweet corn field. And I'm half and half. So the right above, you can see the house is right below that, where I live, is right below the one road and above the Collector A.
But that would not, Collector A would not be going through your property?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, but it would not before you sold it.
Well, that's what they're saying. Yeah, that wouldn't unless they used eminent domain for something.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I completely understand that concern. I think, we could put something in the plan in the, in the recommendations, but my concern with saying it won't be used in the plan is that we don't have control over that. Like was said earlier, a future council 20 years down the road would have that power. I'm
not the city attorney, but I don't think you can tell a future council you can't ever do this.
Right.
It's a recommendation, but much like the council, this past year has increased density on a few parcels, even though it wasn't recommended.
Yeah. So, I'd be happy to add something into the plan specifically, recommending against eminent domain or something. But I don't want to provide a false sense of security that couldn't be changed by some future council that wanted to do that. So,
I was going to add the clarity, though, that the dividing line between phase 1 and 2 is Sain. So 1 is actually east of Sain. And so 2 also could be served along Irish, bypassing the Collector A for traffic purposes is going through the properties you owned. But for service of sanitary, it's on Irish. And it could go 1, 3, 4, but it just, from some intentions, that section was 2 for some interests.
I just want to add a comment. In the interest of kind of building understanding and awareness, I think we're nearly at the end of the eminent domain discussion, but I understand and agree with the notion that we don't want to see eminent domain used for the extension of new roads through lands that don't have roads. But I also want to point out for everyone's awareness that it is very common. So that type of activity of use of eminent domain is pretty rare. It doesn't happen all that often. But what happens a lot all over the state is the use of eminent domain for incremental acquisition from property for the widening of a road. And so to say we won't use eminent domain and there's a little nuance there. Like, yeah, we actually do. Communities do use it all the time in incremental ways. And I just want to be, sort of transparent about that.
Can you make an adjustment on the map that just shows where the dividing line is between 1 and 2? Because I didn't understand it either. I thought it was the rail corridor. You're saying, is it Sain?
It is.
Oh, it's not Sain Road. It's the rail corridor.
Yes.
Okay, so this is correct. So there is some of some of Phase 2 is east of Sign Road. Thanks for the correction. Yep, okay.
So I think I've heard two potential substantive plan edits so far. Applying some of those design guidelines to single and two-family homes, and adding some language about not using eminent domain, or recommending to not use eminent domain to implement the plan. Could we get a general sense of the committee's feelings on those two?
Do you want to, how formal do you want this? Do you want someone to propose an amendment and then discuss it? How Robert's rules of order do you want to get here, Brad?
That's probably a good idea. That's probably a good idea to do it that way.
Makes a motion to amend.
Wait a minute, is the eminent domain only going to be about roads? Because the septic interceptor is in the CIP, scheduled for something like 2030 at $1.5 million. Are we telling or recommending to the city not to build that or use eminent domain until the Haas family sells their land to a developer? That's what I'm asking, because it's another chicken egg question.
Yeah, I mean, we can include that as a recommendation.
Okay.
We can include sewer in that, yeah.
Okay.
Nicole, would you like to propose an amendment?
I would love very much. I will make a motion to include both changes as requested. First, to include the recommendations surrounding the multifamily use and non-residential to extend to single-family use and dual-family residences. And second, to make a strong recommendation in the plan that eminent domain not be used as a default measure to implement new roads and new sewer and sewer infrastructure when at all possible.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, seconded. Any further discussion on any of those points?
Not on those, but on the other item that came up.
We got to stick to these first.
Okay, so we can still do more.
Yeah, we'll do more after. Yep, we will do. We'll stick to these two amendments first. So, any other comments on? Sorry, Brad, I'm taking over. Any further comments on these two amendments at all? All right, then I think on the amendments we can do a voice vote. We'll do a roll call for the overall approval, but for this we can do a voice vote. All in favor can say aye.
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 And anyone opposed can say nay. Any abstentions? All right, then those two are approved. Further amendments, perhaps, Jason?
I think Steve and I went down a technical path earlier talking about the details of how stormwater management is calculated. And because the presentation suggested that the analysis would be in comparison to pre-settlement runoff conditions. And I was looking through the, I think it's Appendix C, to try to understand what it says in there. And it's not entirely clear to me that how significant a difference this is. But what I would offer is that the plan explicitly say that the desire is for comparison to pre-settlement conditions if that results in a more a higher level of water quality protection as compared to using cropland as the pre-development condition.
So like whichever is of higher quality.
Right.
That's really smart.
Right.
So is that, are you proposing that?
I am.
All right, that's a motion.
Making a motion for that amendment.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, seconded by Nicole. Any comments on this amendment? Thoughts on this?
On that side of the dais, do you kind of started to say something and then didn't? Do you see that ask as problematic in order to say like which one's the winner, pre-settlement or current?
No, that must have just been a a Twitch or something.
That's allowed. That's allowed. It's a long meeting. I just wanted to make sure we're not saying something that you all are like, great, how am I going to measure that?
No,
and it becomes useless.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments on this amendment? Maybe? All right.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that what's being proposed here is actually achievable. I know that Resource Commission, when I watched their meeting, they were interested in this business of percentage of runoff, 90 versus 100%. So I think it has to be something that we think is achievable versus, our utopian, idealistic desires. And so maybe it's something that needs to be looked at by the Resource Commission rather than, I know you're an expert, but I'm not. I'm definitely not. And I don't want to put necessarily an obstacle in the way either. So anyway, that's my feeling.
Yeah, our city environmental engineer has been involved in all of this, so he's aware of it. He is comfortable with everything that's in the plan, the 100% stay on and the pre-settlement conditions as the base. So my understanding is that we can't enforce 100% stay on unless it's required as part of the urban service area amendment. So that's the recommendation in the plan, is that it's required by CARPC to have that 100% stay on requirement, so then we can enforce it. So.
And I would note that the achievability of that just comes through just an incrementally larger infiltration basins in development. So there is some cost, but it's not a huge cost. It's an incremental adjustment in the ponds.
And it's through a modeling program that they determine how it's meeting this requirements, and it's reviewed by city staff. Now, the point of like how it actually functions in reality, if other things impact it, like sediment and such, it cannot work to the full extent, but it's through the modeling process that determines if it's going to meet the requirements. So, things do change in the environment, but that's the intent with initial approval, is the developer has to have engineers who present modeling that present to meet these requirements, and it's reviewed by the city.
Further comments, questions on Jason's amendment?
Yeah, just a question as to how that would work. So if your target is pre-settlement, some areas are going to work better than others. So are you looking at this on a phase-by-phase basis or development-by-development basis, or how practically would we do that?
Generally speaking, it's going to be done developer by developer. Each development has to meet that. And you saw I slip a little bit. I'm not an engineer, but in speaking, if the curve numbers are set to being pre-settlement, that is more restrictive than current development. But we can put the language that Jason was talking about. That's why I did Twitch, is saying that it is more restrictive and it's going to require larger basins with pre-settlement. I thought the question on Jason's was clearly stating the recommendation that it's recommended to approve through the USA amendment using pre-settlement curve numbers.
I just want to comment that I like going to the pre-settlement language in for this project, for this plan, because there are existing problems that would be improved by going to pre-settlement.
All right. Anything further? All right, then we can vote on this amendment. All in favor of Jason's amendment, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed can say nay. Anyone want to abstain from voting? All right, then that amendment also is approved. Any further comments, amendments, any discussion, anything at all? Ed?
I would move that we do add on the map potential detention pond at the southwest corner of Irish and Kane.
And on the screen, can you kind of circle, Brad, or I don't know who's controlling the screen, what that area, that right there?
A lot of water comes off that 80, and it all goes through the neighborhood. So if you want to make one of your biggest improvements to a pre-settlement situation, it would be controlling that water.
All right.
Since it's outside a procedural, can I ask a question before I second it? Okay. So a point of clarification, yes. Since it's outside this map and it's not part of this neighborhood plan, does that just come in by way of a recommendation? Because I think what Ed's calling out is a very holistic way to look at this. Is that what the motion would be, that we add it in a recommendation in this plan? Okay.
I'm seeing.
That's how I would see it happening. Is it's outside of the plan area. It's not in a future urban development area, but we could include it as a recommendation to help improve stormwater conditions in the neighborhood.
Then I second the motion.
All right, seconded by Nicole. Further comments on this? Ed, do you want to speak to this anymore than you have? All right, any other questions, comments? All right, seeing none, then all in favor of Ed's amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And anyone opposed can say nay. Anyone want to abstain? All right, that is also approved. Any other amendments or just general comments, questions, thoughts, musings?
Yeah, I talked with Deanna yesterday about the map with the water mains on it, and we were going to get that fixed, and I just wanted to check with her, has that been fixed? So that it's accurate?
Yeah, I did mention that to clarify for everyone, and maybe Brad will get us there, but this map, it's water line map, actually, not the sanitary, but the line work is a little bit confusing, and I noted it to Brad that we'll just make some changes so that it's accurate.
Yeah, we'll get that taken care of in the final version.
Any other things, Jason?
I know we're going to recommend this plan or not, or I am still hearing the public comment, and I'm concerned about it. And so I really feel like there needs to be a plan moving forward to deal with the residents kind of as a group that have these concerns. I know that Deanna and Brad have done, I feel, an outstanding job in their memos to address some of the concerns, but it's still not getting through. We're still not getting the communication going through, and there's still different ideas about what a FUTA should be. And so I feel like before we vote on this, I want to say to people, I feel the committee has gone as far as we can go. We're not engineers on certain things, and this needs to go to the right committees. There needs to be better communication with the residents. That even if we recommend this, I want you to understand that what we're doing is we're saying is we feel as though there's nothing more that we can do with it, and that it needs to go into the next stage of development. At least that's where I'm coming from. I want much better communication with you, but at the same time, I feel it needs to move on in its development. And if it gets changed later on in order to even better address some of the concerns brought up here, fantastic. But from a budgetary standpoint, we've run out of money that was originally budgeted for the process, so I don't see that we can necessarily meet as a steering committee. And I think you want to meet with the decision makers, like your alders, that are going to be ultimately approving this. So.
And maybe I'll make a suggestion. I don't know if Nicole and Micah, if you guys have some kind of a group or a mailing list for people in this area. Perhaps, Mike, if you can find some paper and you want to get people's information today, before it leaves, or Nicole, if you can find some paper, I would suggest either Micah, you want to raise your hand again, or Nicole, please contact them, give them your contact information. I have a feeling they would be happy to have a group that they do outreach with.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've said before, I've had numerous Zoom meetings, one-on-one on this topic, on the apartment developments off of Seminole Highway, kind of over by my way. So if you have any specific questions, want to talk through specific concerns, definitely message Mike. Ideally, if you could message myself and Micah, that would be really great, just so we can both hear, and if one of us can't make it, at least the other one's aware of the concerns. But absolutely, please do. And it's just first dot last name at fitchburgwi.gov.
It's on the website as well.
Yes, sure is.
Jason, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Aaron, I wanted to take advantage of your invitation for musings. I have a couple of musings. I want to point out, and it's probably hard to recognize this locally, or especially if you're in the neighborhood and you're not a planner and you're otherwise not really involved in the planning environment. What the city is doing here is a best practice and is unusual in the region. Because what you are doing is thinking about how development can occur when it comes here, and like it or not, we're growing by 100,000-ish people a decade here, and the people showing up, and you can't just turn off that spigot. So the question is not, are we going to grow, but how are we going to grow, and what choices are we going to make along the way, and what are we going to be left with, in certain places as that happens. And the more typical process that occurs with development is that these decisions aren't, at this level of detail, aren't made until a developer is at the table and has proposed something themselves and brings a lot of it's the developer bringing all this information to the table, not a consultant team hired by the city. And so instead what you have here is a much more neutral environment in which you don't yet have the developer there. I mean, we've talked to property owners, we've sought some input, I think, from development interest, but it's really not developer driven. And this is a best practice to do it in this way, because I guarantee you that the outcomes that are going to result here over the decades are going to be different because of this effort than they would have been if the city were just allowing it to happen more incrementally and be entirely development driven. I would also observe and acknowledge that I know the city has been doing this for a long time. They've gotten pretty good at this, and yet this has been, I think, the hardest one that the city has done, because for the first time, the city tried some long-term, fairly detailed planning in an area with a lot of existing residents, and suggesting that, okay, the development wave is coming this way, and we can't not think about this. We have to think about this, and existing residents, and we have been listening, are preferring that things stay the way they are. I give the city and consultant team a lot of credit for listening, for responding in good, productive ways to that input. Not just saying yes to everything. I mean, there are some fundamental city principles in place about how you develop, how you want to develop as a city, that you're trying to balance with the interests of existing residents. And I think a lot of what's come out here is a good balance. There are policies and responses here that are acknowledging and incorporating feedback from residents. There are still people that aren't happy, that don't want to see the change, that didn't get what they wanted. The east-west road, Collector A, that's tough. Like, there just aren't good options when there is more traffic. And whether this area develops quickly or not, eventually there is going to be more traffic east-west through this part of the city. And so thinking that through and coming up with the least bad option is necessary. So I know that it has been hard. It has stretched out. So I give credit to everyone for allowing this process to stretch out and to have more time than was originally planned. Even if it doesn't feel like you're now fully informed and you know everything you need to know, the ability to wait and pause and think and study is not limitless. And there has been some good effort to do some waiting and pausing and thinking in balance with, we still need to move forward. So I commend everyone involved, including my compatriots here on the steering committee, for engaging in that process. And I feel pretty good about the outcomes, the compromises, and the policy ideas that are in this document.
Any further comments?
Could you just explain again, if the committee were to adopt this and then the council were to adopt this, and so it's policy or whatever, how could changes be made? One of my big concerns has been from the very beginning, I don't know what our land is going to be. Maybe my kids want to farm. Maybe my grandkids want to farm. Maybe we use our claims that we still have on the land and we split it into 35-acre parcels. We don't know. But now the city, if this is adopted, says this is what's going to be here. And that's been my big concern, is that there's a lot of people on both sides. We should keep it agriculture. We should build. It's like my say is very limited because I don't know yet what I would want to happen in 20 years. Could be completely different. So what changes could I make or could be made after this is adopted?
Yeah, so the plan gets adopted as an appendix to the comp plan, so it's part of that city policy, and then the future land use map gets adopted. It changes the future land use map that's in the comp plan now. The comp plan has a process for amending it, so the way that happens now is we have 2 comp plan amendments, minor comp plan amendments a year, and that would be the process that needs to be gone through to change the plan. But that process is there for that reason, because things change, and the idea is that any amendment that is made to it would need to be consistent with the vision and goals of the plan, unless the plan were amended to change the vision and goals. I think that would be a harder thing to sell because of the amount of process that this has gone through to result in those things. But typically, as far as the land use goes and what happens on that land, there is a process to amend it in the future. And the future land use being adopted in this plan does not change the zoning. So, you remain in agricultural zoning. All the agriculturally zoned properties remain in agricultural zoning. That use can continue as long as desired. It's just that when there is a rezoning, then it has to be consistent with the future land use map. So.
Okay, now I'm confused, because what we've said all along is that, the property owners have rights and nothing's going to happen until they sell the land to a developer. But she's pointed out that, maybe as far as estate planning, maybe I want to use my splits. So now that you've got 35-acre splits, you don't have contiguous, how many acres? And it's in 35-acre splits, and then those children want to do different things with their land. Are they going to have the freedom to do that? It sounds like what you're saying. What I'm concerned for her about is that, okay, we are doing this, but I'm still recognizing property owner rights for her, for the Haas family, the Jones family, and so forth. But it seems like when we put this out there, and it becomes part of amendment to the comprehensive land plan, the way it will be perceived by future council members is this is a done deal. You see where I'm coming from? I want to see that she is able to have the freedom as far as estate planning to be able to break it up if she wants to. I mean, the very first meeting, I can remember she said, I don't want anybody telling me what to do with my land, and I fully agree with that.
I think there's always some limits. Like you can't put a car manufacturer.
I was about to say that.
Land.
If you want to change zoning of your land, you have to come to get that zoning changed, correct? That's with any person who lives within the city limits of Fitchburg, right? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
You can't just change the zoning and use of your land. Everybody, if I wanted my house to be used as small I'm making up zones now, but if I wanted to change the fundamental zoning of my land, I cannot just say, this is my land, I get to put a mini factory on it. The city could say, absolutely not. But within your current zoning, she has every right to use that. Now, the question is still, I don't need to talk about you like you're not here. You have a mechanism to come through and say, well, actually, my family does want to change the zoning for X, Y, and Z reasons, and bring that in front of council and maybe tie back to some of these value statements. We used to do this on the school board, where if someone would bring something forward and state where in policy it still meets vision, then you would say, well, shoot, it does meet vision to change this small thing to allow X, Y, and Z. And so it sounds like that's what, Brad, you're putting forward, that if you wanted to change the type of zoning, you kind of have to come and make a case like everybody within the city.
And I'm not necessarily talking type of zoning, but, you know, if we wanted to break off 35 acres for, that can still be a farm in the city, you know, this section, I want that flexibility to be able to do that without having to go back to the land you know, and go through this whole process. I have claims on the land that should be able to build 3 more houses if I wanted to, and have 35 acres for each one.
I'm going to just step in here. This plan, the Greenfield neighborhood plan, has no impact, as we said, on the zoning. It has no impact on the rural residential development criteria. You'll still have to follow the rural residential development criteria, but that's a separate item there that really has no connection to our discussions this evening.
Courtney, Courtney, I know you want to try and get in here. I wanted to give you the chance to
Okay,
speak.
I know that it's running late and everybody has spoken. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you all for the process, for involving stakeholders, including our public. I think that's really commendable. Also agree, it's great that this has extended the way it has to involve everyone. Jason, I appreciated your comments. I guess I would say that I have a fundamental disagreement with the assumption that development in our neighborhood is inevitable. And I think that there are mechanisms that the city could use, such as developing an urban growth boundary that would potentially change an outcome of development our way. I am saddened at the thought of losing all of this agricultural land, mainly because I think we're destroying our natural spaces and we're destroying animal habitats, and nobody is speaking up about that. So that makes me, on a personal level, very sad. I also am sad at the thought of losing the character of our neighborhood, and I know some people have spoken about that. You know, there are families here that go back multiple generations, and this land and the character of the neighborhood is very important to the character of Fitchburg. And if we just, you know, start building houses everywhere and take away some of our jewels, like Stoneman Sweet Corn Farm, for example, I think we're doing a great disservice to the city, and that's kind of all I wanted to say. I think that, you know, it's not necessarily a done deal that this gets developed. I think we can consider even taking this out of FUTA, and I know that's probably a pipe dream, but that's just my sense. So, thank you.
I think to answer that, I would respond that what I've learned through the process is that the preservers of farmland are mostly the farmers themselves. And we have taken them for granted, and we've had this beautiful illusion of an incredible countryside and whatever, while they have labored and slaved and for generations worked the land and adopted new technologies and so forth. I think everybody wants the development to be slow. They don't want it to be fast. I'm glad that we have preserved as much open space as we could, more than there was before, and that's going to be talked about more. I've not really heard from the major stakeholders, with the exception of maybe Frostwood Farms, who has been rather ambiguous about what their intentions are, that any of the major stakeholders, farming families, want to develop overnight or even 10 years down the line. So we won't know, but I do, having lived in other places where I've seen the development happen, and I'd rather have it happen in an orderly place. I'd rather know where the roads are going and where the infrastructure is going to be, and have the neighborhood involved, so that at least we have it looks halfway decent in terms of, with the densities and things that we were discussing before with the slope and so forth of the building, so that it looks graceful. It's not like, okay, this developer came along and council okayed it, and then this developer came along and it's just ugly. So I'd rather have a plan. I don't see it happening overnight by any chance, and but I respect what you're saying about nature, and I have worked in other ways behind the scenes for other things, because I am concerned about the nature aspect of our neighborhood, and I hope to continue on in that way. But you need people to step up and work to restore wetland, or work to cut down brush in the woodlands. Or it needs people, and it needs money.
Ed?
I agree with Elizabeth that I think we're better to move a plan forward, and I would argue in favor of this plan. I hope that very little of it ever happens. Maybe none of it. That would be a great outcome. But over time, it's probably going to happen. And when you lay something out on paper, then you tell people what they potentially can and cannot do with this property. Without having that plan in place, it's a free-for-all. And that's why we in Fitchburg do this process. That's why we maybe go a little bit further than other communities might in trying to do that, because you don't have these arguments with developers who want to put high density somewhere where you don't want it. And I think we've accomplished a lot. We're never going to get to a point where everyone's going to be happy with this. I'm not happy with it. But when you look at where we started with regard to densities and a number of the things that we've accomplished, if we don't move this forward to Plan Commission and Council with a positive recommendation, then they're getting it with no recommendation. Now, what do you want? I mean, does that just open up the process? Do we go back to the original Plan A, B, and C and end up with something that we would consider to be, as a group, probably far worse than this? And that's what I'm concerned about. If the steering committee doesn't approve this plan, that doesn't mean that something isn't going to happen. It doesn't mean that there isn't I mean, we don't have the ability to approve this or deny it. All we can do is recommend. And I think we're better off with a positive recommendation.
Just to add in a small way to that, I've heard a previous, not currently serving alder, but to that point, a previous alder comment that they wished there was more high density in this plan. Yeah. And I stated that flies in the face of what this neighborhood is. And so I think, to your point, it feels better for this group of neighbors and this group of people that truly love District 4, even though we might disagree on how to love it best. I think it feels more like us making a decision about our homes than maybe more urban areas of this city who might not understand the beauty of this space. And just to kind of add credence to what you're saying, Ed, I think that's a really great point.
Yeah, I mean, I think a positive recommendation carries some weight. A negative recommendation carries none. And that's my concern. So I'm going to move that we recommend approval of this plan as amended tonight to Plan Commission and Council.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Nicole. I want to give people one more chance to say anything if they have any last comments at all, last questions. All right. Seeing none, Brad, you want to go through the roll call?
Yeah. I think we'll start on this end. So, Ed?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Nicole?
Aye.
Mary Sue? Courtney?
No.
All right, let me just tally these up. I'm pretty sure we've got a quorum here. Five yeses and 2 nos.
All right. So that, I guess that passes, but the recommended approval goes forward. And the timeline again is up here on the screens. To me, September 16th and September 23rd are the 2 most important ones. The referrals, the presentations, I think you know all of that. You're welcome to provide comments at any point in time, but in terms of public meetings where you can speak, where people are going to be taking action, September 16th and 23rd are the 2 main ones. Is there anything else, Brad?
Yeah, I'll add that I would almost say that the June 17th Plan Commission might be the most important for public comments because they'll be doing the public hearing that day. It's still within the comment deadline, so they'll be taking comments and it'll allow more time for consideration before a revised plan would come for adoption. So,
great. Steve, anything further on?
Just want to appreciate everyone's time and the conversations. I know we didn't land exactly what everyone wanted, but I will say that I think it's added more open space, created ideas of some agrihood, and working through this has been an interesting project for my entire career of 17 years. And I do hope that you found that there were some wins for you guys and in this process working with the committee. I appreciate the project. I'm not going to forget this one. And but I hope that everyone feels they got a little piece of win in that, and I appreciate everyone's time.
Yeah. Steve, thank you and your team for all your work. Brad, thank you for all of your work on this. Deanna as well. Really appreciate all the time that you spent and all this. And thank you everyone on the committee for being involved in this and for the residents for being so engaged. I mean, that to me is what this is all about, and getting engaged and listening to the residents. So with that, thank you everyone.
Thank you everyone.